This is Michelle Vandepass, and I'm pleased to welcome Michael Neill today. Michael has been known as Supercoach, and it's been said that if Superman needed a coach, it would be Michael Neill. The beginning of this interview got cut off, but please enjoy where we pick up talking about enlightened marketing. What are the states of being or the states of mind? So if we're in our head, can we change our experience, or do we just need to be at peace with our experience? How would you explain that?
Well, one of the things that anyone who, if you take a look, you'll notice is your experience changes whether you change it or not. So you can be totally caught up in something and really worked up about it, and then the next day or maybe a few days later, or sometimes it's years later, you look back and you go, wow, what was that all about? Or you can be in a situation where it's been that way forever. So let's say your partner leaves it's the traditional one, the lid off the toothpaste.
Right.
Some days that doesn't bother you at all. Some days that's grounds for divorce and possible right? What's changed? Well, what's changed isn't the world. What's changed is the state of mind in which you're experiencing it. What's changed is both the thoughts that you're thinking, but even more than that, how real and meaningful those thoughts look to you. So I had a chance recently to spend some time speaking in a maximum security prison, where over half of the people I was speaking to were in there for violent crimes, murder, the hardcore stuff. And one of the things that we talked about is most people have the thought, if that guy does that one more time, I'm going to kill him. But for most of us, we wouldn't give that thought a second thought. It doesn't seem real. It doesn't seem compelling. It doesn't seem like, oh yeah, I'm going to do it. It's just a thought that passes through our head. At the level of consciousness where most of us are functioning, we can see that that's just a passing thought. Well, for a lot of those guys in there, when they were having that thought, that wasn't a passing thought. That was their innermost clarity and being talking to them. In the state of mind that they were in, they were, it didn't seem like there was any real choice about that. They had the thought, it must be true because it's happening inside their head. They got to do something about it. As we begin to see more about how thought works, we see that the vast majority of thoughts that go through our head on a daily basis are best left in one ear and out the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And you actually talk about three different states of thought, or three different states of mind, I think you call them.
I believe you, but I'm not really sure what that would be. I talk about three principles, and
Okay, and there's like a low. Let me get my note here because I think this is really important. So there's a low quality state of mind and a higher quality state of mind that you talk about.
Well, okay. So here's one of the ways that I talk about it. I talk about sort of levels of state of mind or levels of consciousness. And the metaphor that I use is the metaphor of a glass elevator. So if you imagine being in a glass elevator, if you're at the bottom, you can only see what you can see through the elevator. So you may know theoretically that there's a world out there beyond whatever it is at street level, but all you can see is what's at street level. And if somebody tells you about what's going on beyond that, you kind of have to take their word for it. And if somebody says, if you go about 5 levels out, you can see the ocean and you can see the mountains. It's like, okay, that sounds nice, and I either believe you or I don't, but I don't see them. Now, when you go up the elevator higher, you can see more. If you keep going up, you can see more and more. Well, our consciousness, our states of mind work like that. There are times where we're at the bottom of the elevator and the world looks objectively real. So what we're thinking in our head, there's no gap between that and our experience. We think if my thoughts say this guy needs to die, this guy needs to die. If my thought says these people are bad, these people are bad. If my thought says I'm worthless, I'm worthless. There's no question, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. What I think is true at the bottom of the elevator. Well, I go up the elevator a little ways, and now I kind of can see that maybe it's less objective than I thought. Maybe it's subjective. Maybe It's, well, yeah, I am dumb sometimes, but I could see it a different way. I could see I'm just uneducated in this area, or I just haven't had much practice at this. I begin to see that there are more than one ways to, there's more than one way to see things. And I have more flexibility, I have more freedom at that level. Well, I go up even further on the elevator, and I now get to a place where I start to see, oh, it's not just subjective, it's actually created, it's actually constructed. It's not real until I actually start thinking it that way. So there's an old joke about three baseball umpires, and they're calling balls and strikes, and one of them says, it's they're just our balls and strike. It's a ball or it's a strike. And so he's thinks that what he sees is objective truth. The second umpire, he's a little higher up, and he goes, well, they're, they look like strikes and balls to me. So, I can see it's my point of view, but that's what it looks like. The third umpire, who's even higher up at that third level, says, they ain't strikes or balls until I calls them balls or strikes. In other words, he knows that it's his declaration that makes something a ball or a strike. And at that level, we start to see that we're not just reacting to the world in different ways, we're actually creating what we see by the way that we're looking. And at that level, you've got a lot more freedom. Now, there's an even higher level of consciousness where you start to see that the entire world that we're perceiving is illusory. And this is the spiritual level. This is if you've ever read a spiritual teacher from Jesus to Buddha and all in between, they always talk about the inner reality. They always talk about the outer world as the illusion, as the Maya. And in the same way as, I've got to take somebody's word for it if I'm at the bottom of the elevator, that there's really an ocean and a mountains at the higher levels, there's an element to which most of us kind of have to take other people's word for it about the spiritual reality until we glimpse it. And then once we get a glimpse of those higher states of consciousness, it becomes revolutionary. It really fundamentally changes the way that we see the life that we live. And it gives us an incredible amount of freedom to maneuver.
I love this, and I think a lot of people who are going to be listening and watching to this are business owners, entrepreneurs, people that just basically feel overwhelmed with trying to keep the spiritual perspective, be creative, run a business, keep their family going, right? So how do you apply this? Even if you can see the big picture, how can you actually apply it while you're trying to run a business and your family and everything else in the world?
Well, one of the distinctions that I think is really important is you don't apply gravity. Gravity applies. So if I want to fly, or if I want to walk, or if I want to get stronger, I have to take gravity into account. It's one of the main forces at play. Well, the principles that I'm talking about, the principle of thought, which is that our experience of life is an experience of thought in the moment. The principle of consciousness, which says that at different levels of consciousness, we're going to experience the world in different ways. And the nature of consciousness is such that it brings our thinking to life. It brings it to our senses and makes it real to us. The principle of mind, which is that we're part of this larger reality. We can only see the bit of it that we can see, but this larger potential, this energy and intelligence behind life is always at play. I don't apply those, but if I see them, if I take them into account, I'm going to navigate life more effectively. So, for example, I was dealing with, over the past few days, I was coaching a doctor, an incredible specialist, somebody who's one of only 4 people in the world qualified to do the kind of work that they do, unbelievably stressed, whole life kind of overwhelming them, coming down on them. We talked for really 2.5 of the 3 days about the inside-out nature of experience, and about how they thought their stress was coming from their circumstance. So they thought their stress was coming from their patients, they thought their stress was coming from the insurance companies, they thought their stress was coming from growing older, they thought their stress was coming from what somebody they were in a relationship with had done. Well, as we continued to look together at the truth human experience, that we live in the experience of thought, not the experience of circumstance, suddenly it stopped looking to this doctor like, I've got to change the world in order to feel better. I've got to change the world in order to lessen my stress. I may need to maybe quit my job or leave this relationship. When I see that it's my own thinking that is creating the stress, and I recognize that the nature of thought is that if I don't rev it up, it'll settle itself back down, then suddenly I'm able to look at things in a much clearer way. It's like if you have a snow globe and you shake it up and shake it up and shake it up, and then try and look through it to see what's going on, it's going to be difficult to see clearly. If I make space to let it settle, because I understand that that's how snow globes work, and that the nature of a snow globe is clear when it's not being shaken up, then I know that I kind of just have to wait a minute, and I'll see it more clearly. What's the same with our thinking? When we see that our experience is an experience of thought, thought will settle if we let it. And what's left when thought settles is the clarity of mind that we make our best decisions from, and that we make our best evaluations and assessments and judgments from. Then that's going to have a big effect on how I run my business.
So basically, are you saying to, take a breath, calm down, stop, and let all the flutter, the monkey mind, the snow globe pieces just settle for a minute? Is it really just taking a breath?
That's a natural conclusion that somebody would come to if they understood how the mind worked. So, for example, and so what I'm talking about isn't just the behavioral prescription. People always want to, well, Tom's actually, having a coaching session with one of the wealthiest women in the world recently, and she actually yelled at me at one point. She said, "Just tell me what to do and I'll do it." And I was, taken aback, and I was a bit apologetic, because the truth was there was very little value in my telling her what to do, because each of our experiences and lives and directions are so individual that somebody else's great advice, it might be helpful sometimes, it might get in the way sometimes. But if somebody gets in touch with that deeper part of themselves, with that deeper wisdom that is always guiding us if we listen to it, with that deeper intelligence, with that clarity and common sense that we all have inside us, they're just going to do better. They're going to make better decisions. And so for me, while it's true to say, most of the time, if you just take a deep breath, you'll make a better decision, that's paltry. That's of such relatively small value compared to understanding the nature of the mind, and that potential is always available to you.
I have followed your work for a while, and in fact, I don't know if I should really tell you this, but I guess I'm just going to be transparent and come out and tell you, Michael. I started interviewing people about 5.5 years ago, and you were the very first person I ever interviewed. You were gracious enough to give me an interview. There were big fires happening, and we talked about that. So thank you. And at that time, you were doing a lot of business coaching and coaching on the radio, which I know you do. And it seems like you've come along to, you have always been spiritual and creative, but it seems like you're delving into that more and more. And I've always been fascinated at the place where creativity, spirituality, and business come together. Is it that it's more open now to the masses and to most entrepreneurs to be open to these things, or are you just getting more clarity on how to bring them together? Or is it both?
I actually think it's both, because there's no question that I've gotten a lot clearer. I've always been looking for, I can almost mark my coaching career in two, with a line down the middle. And there's, before the line, I was always looking for the most useful line. And what I mean by that is, I didn't think there was a deeper reality to life. It seemed all subjective to me. I was kind of at that level of consciousness where I could see that it wasn't objective, that it was subjective, that depending on how we thought about it, that changed our experience of it. But it still seemed to me like the best you could do was come up with a better point of view. And so that's how I coached, is I looked for a more useful point of view for people to look at their lives from. About 6 years ago, and this is what I talk about in the Inside Out Revolution, I came across this new understanding, and I just saw it. I couldn't explain it. In fact, I didn't even understand what it was that I saw. But for the first time, it was like I went from here on the elevator up to here. I got a glimpse. I didn't stay there, but I got a glimpse of the big picture. And there was no way I could come back to coaching the way that I used to coach. Now, fortunately, it turns out that seeing the big picture actually makes you more effective at business and makes you more creative and all the things that my clients wanted anyways. So I didn't have to give up my day job. But I did have to really take a fresh look at how I did what I did, because the world didn't look the same to me anymore. And so that's one part of it. I think that's true. My perception shifted. Now the other half of it, the other part of it is, I think there is a lot more openness to this conversation than there used to be. And I couldn't tell you where that line is between how much is me changing and how much is general cultural receptivity changing.
What I love about this conversation is I've been interviewing some experts, and pretty much everybody, including yourself, just is saying similar things in different ways. You've got to keep a big picture in order to stay out of overwhelm, in order to stay in creating a less stressful life and creating a more successful life, however you want to say it. You've got to keep the big picture. You have to have a big picture view. Otherwise, you get caught up in the details. All you're seeing, you're at the bottom of the elevator. I love that analogy. And so is that really, if we boil it down to one tip you're saying around this piece, it's keep the big picture, stay at the top of the elevator?
Again, I'd love to be able to say, but
I want the answer, Michael.
But the problem with that is we can't stay at the top of the elevator. The elevator doesn't work that way. The elevator goes up and down. But here's the thing. If we understand that there's an elevator and we're on it and it's going up and down, then we get less thrown when our worldview shrinks. I mean, another way of thinking about it is it's like an aperture, an opening. And when we're towards the bottom of the elevator, we're looking at the world through this very narrow aperture. And then there will be times when there's less on our mind, so there's less going on in our heads, where the aperture opens and we're seeing more of the big picture. And then we'll get a lot on our mind, we'll get caught up in something, we'll get worried about something, we'll get stressed, and the aperture closes back down, and then it will open back up. And if we understand that that's the movement that we're living inside of, we're less likely to make important decisions when we can sense that our aperture is closed. We're less likely to make the big decisions here. Whereas if you don't understand that there's an aperture, and you think, I'm seeing things for real, whatever my state of mind is, then I'm much more likely to make the big decisions when I'm least equipped to make them. Because that's when I have that sense of urgency, and I've got to sort this out now, and this is terrible. When I'm at the higher stages, when I'm further up the elevator, when my aperture is more open, when there's less on my mind, it wouldn't occur to me that I've got to make this decision now or else. That's something that looks real when you're here, not when you're here.
I love that, because it helps us also not beat ourselves up when we understand there's a natural ebb and flow, there's an aperture, sometimes we're up here, sometimes we do get caught up in the details. It makes it a lot less judging of myself if I'm in the wrong place in the moment, you know, if I'm not at the top of the elevator when I'm trying to do some detailed work.
You know, I give a keynote sometimes on 4 keys to optimal performance. And what I talk about is I talk about these different elements, and I talk about being at your best more of the time. And so that's recognizing that, boy, when I'm here, I just work better. I'm more creative, I'm more decisive, I'm more understanding, I relate to other people better. And what lets me be here is having less on my mind, is not being so caught up in my thinking, not so worried about, well, you know, is it this or is it this, and what am I going to do? And, you know, the more open-minded I am, the more this intelligence behind the mind this deeper energy, this deeper wisdom can come through me. Now, the second thing that I need to know is how to create less damage when I'm lower on the elevator. So when I'm not at my best, if I can recognize that sooner, I'm less likely to mess things up. I'm more likely to postpone a critical meeting if I know that I'm in no state of mind to have it. In the same way as I might if I have really bad flu, than I am to just plow on and do it. Now, you can't always do that. I'm not suggesting cancel your meetings until you're feeling good. It doesn't work that way. You know, athletes are the same thing. You can't just stop playing until you feel better. But if I understand that's what's going on, time to time I will get nudged down the elevator. From time to time I won't be in my optimal state of mind. Then I also start to see, well, this is a self-correcting mechanism. I don't need to do anything to go back up the elevator. I will naturally go back to that if I just stay in the game, if I just stay present and don't go up in my head and try and fix it. So those two things, being at your best more of the time and creating less damage in your life when you're not, in and of themselves are life-changing. And they'll change the way that you work, because most of us think that the more we think about it, the better we're going to work. And in fact, the exact opposite tends to be true.
Do you meditate?
I don't meditate as a formal practice, but one of the side effects of seeing these principles, and this is something I've got a whole chapter on in the Inside Out Revolution, is you wind up spending a lot more time in states of meditation. So these kind of higher states of consciousness, where there's less on your mind, they are states of meditation. They're the states that people are trying to get to when they're involved in the act or the practice of meditation. So it's not that I'm against meditation. And in fact, the state of meditation is incredibly powerful. It's just that you don't necessarily have to do a practice to hang out in the state.
Is there anything that you do to help clear your mind when you find yourself in the small ground level full of busy head? Are there any practices? Is there anything that you do?
You know, there aren't really any practices, and there are things that I do. And I'll see if that makes sense when I finish the thought. So sometimes, if I'm really caught up, I'll take myself for a walk. I'll take myself out of the situation that I'm in. Sometimes, if I notice I'm really caught up, I got a lot on my mind, I'll just drop it. I'll put it on the back burner. I'll just go, okay, I'm not even going to think about this for the next couple hours, and I'll come back to it later. Sometimes I'll flick the TV on and watch some, Sports Center or football or whatever's on. Sometimes I'll go have tea with my wife and that. There isn't a one thing that I would always do. So there's not a practice. But because I know that I'll be clear later, what I don't do is push through and try even harder when I'm in that state of mind.
I think that's really valuable and important, because most of us, when we're in a problem, we're so caught up in the problem, we're so in the inertia of it and the minutia of it, that we just do try to push through it. And you're saying just do something else. That's really important.
Here's the thing. Almost anyone who's had a great breakthrough, like a business breakthrough or an insight into something, knows that it happened when they stopped thinking about it. It happened when they went to bed. It happened when they went out after a hard day of thinking about it. It happened, in a dream. It happened when they were talking about something completely different, and suddenly it was like, oh my God, I know what to do. Well, that's just how the mind works. When we've got less on our mind, there's more space for that deeper intelligence to come through. And again, if I understand that, it's not that I then need a practice, which is just putting more on my mind. I just know I'm going to get the insight when I'm not trying so hard.
That's great. Now, you talk about different keys. I'm not sure that you use the word success, but I'll say different keys to success. And one of them that I find really interesting is that you do say you have to invest time and energy into what you want, that there is no open your business and get rich quick scheme, regardless of what a lot of people tell us. You know, download this $47 product and you'll make 100,000 next weekend. You know, we hear a lot of that online. And I really like that you're saying we need some investment of time and energy. Would you explain what that looks like to you?
Sure. I mean, what I found, and I've been doing this for 23 years professionally, working in the success industry, working with people who want to be successful at what they do, is most people are about as successful as they ought to be. And what I mean by that is that if you look at the amount of time and energy people have put into their projects, it corresponds pretty well with how their business is doing. Now, that doesn't mean that just because you put a lot of time and energy into something, you'll automatically succeed at it. Time and energy isn't the only factor. It just means, so in other words, there was actually a piece of research done that I read recently that showed that hard work was not a prerequisite to success, but a lack of work was a preventative.
I love that, because there's plenty of businesses that fail. You know, restaurants where people work their tails off and they fail, and businesses that fail. But what you're saying is you can't sit at home and think about it.
Right, that's not going to work. And I've had the privilege and the horror of working with some of these internet marketers. They're not all internet marketers are created alike. And some of these multi-level network marketing companies. I've even worked with the head of a couple of network marketing companies. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, the companies are built on lies. They would say they're built on hope, but that's just a prettier way of saying what I said. So if you look at their books are not reflective of what they're saying is going on. I remember actually the first time I got that was years and years ago, and I was working with a network marketer, and I loved him. He was the most positive guy I'd ever worked with. And he kept saying, yeah, I'm almost there. I've almost got my 10 people that I need to get for the system to break through, and I'm so close, and I think this coaching's really helping. And it wasn't until maybe we had 4 sessions together that it occurred to me to ask him what almost there meant. And he said, well, I've got one.
Wow.
And this is the problem with trying to be positive, is if trying to be positive means you're out of touch with reality, it's really hard to maneuver. Better to know that you've got one and find creative ways to get the other 9 than to pretend you're almost there when you're just not.
There is a fine line between hope and lying, as you called it, and I think it's being truthful to yourself and knowing what's really happening in the moment and not making it up about what you wish it were.
Well, and I think I think true hope comes from seeing the infinite creative potential of the mind. See, I've been fortunate in a way, in that, and it's difficult to go chicken or egg which way it's gone, but most of my projects now go from the first time the idea occurs to me to money in the bank in the space of less than 6 weeks. So
wow.
It's easy for me to see that I can look at the future and go, I have no idea how I'm going to make the next chunk of money. And know that that's okay, because I just haven't had the next idea. And when the next idea comes, there doesn't have to be a huge lag time between that idea and the reality. Now, everyone's business is different. I'm not suggesting that's the same for everybody, but the potential is there. And when people start to see, I am one thought away from a new business. I am one thought away from a less stressful way of being in this business. I am one thought away from a solution to this big problem. It's easier to have hope, because even if I have no idea what that thought is right now, I know that that thought could come at any moment, because that's just the nature of the mind. When the mind is relatively empty, new thought comes in. I don't have to do anything to make it happen. That's just how it works. And there's something about really seeing that, not as an affirmation, like I'm one thought away, I'm one thought away, I'm one thought away, but actually saying, no, I really am. I could see something in the next moment that would make sense of this to me, because that's what always does happen. I could get an idea in the next moment that will lead to the future direction of my business, which is how those things happen.
That's full of hope. I
Oh,
love it. Yeah.
and that's real. That's hope based on, oh yeah, that's how it works.
Nice. People can find out more. Really, they can find out everything about you at supercoach.com because it links to your books. And then if people buy your books, you've got tons of free bonuses and offers that people can get. They can find out about the whole Insight Out revolution. And there's links everywhere out of supercoach.com. Is that the best website people can
Yeah, that's the best way, and they can sign up. We do a free weekly newsletter. They can get the information about the weekly radio shows and blogs, and we try and make as much stuff available for people at either free or at a very low cost. And then if people hear it and they go, "Oh, I want to learn more," then we have video programs, we have live programs, we have trainings. But honestly, the best way, and if this has sparked something in you, go out and grab a copy of the Inside Out Revolution, because that is the best job I've done yet of putting all this into words in a way that people report back, oh, now I get it. Now it looks different to me. Now it's night and day to how it looked before.
Good. Last question. If you had $1 million sitting around that you wanted to give to a cause or a person or something you believed in, who would you or what would you give $1 million to?
Well, my very first reaction was I just spent most of August in Laos as part of an orphanage project, and my first thought was, well, I give it to them, and I might, but I think if I stopped and thought about it, I would probably put it into creating a sort of an inside-out, principles-based education program, because the most common things people get once they see it is they go, why wasn't I taught this earlier? Why didn't I learn this in school? And sort of put together some kind of program that made this accessible to kids in school. I've worked with a number of teenagers and young adults over the years on a volunteer basis, and I probably would wind up putting it towards a project like that.
Very needed. As well as a mom, I can say our education system needs some help like you, so thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you here.
And thank you, and I'm honored that I was your first. I hope I'm not your last.
Thank you. Bye, Michael.
Bye.